Good evening and welcome. This is the 24th lecture in the FAAA lecture series that was started in 2011, and we would like to thank very much our sponsors, Symphony Limited, for supporting the FAAA lecture series this year in 2015. Our speaker today is Dr. Rory Hyde. He will be speaking on the topic of All of This Belongs to You. Dr. Hyde is Curator of Contemporary Architecture and Urbanism at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London and Adjunct Senior Fellow, University of Melbourne. He was co-host of The Architects, a weekly radio show on architecture which was presented in the Australian Pavilion at the 2012 Venice Architecture Biennale. Dr. Hyde has worked in the Netherlands with Volume Magazine, Almanac, MVRDV, the NAI, Victor and Rolf, and the Mediamatic, and previously in Melbourne with BKK Architects. His first book, Future Practice, Conversations from the Edge of Architecture, was awarded the AIA Prize for Architecture in the Media. Dr. Hyde completed his PhD from RMIT on emerging models of practice enabled by new technologies. May I request all of you to silence your mobile phones, and with that, may we please welcome Dr. Hyde.
Thanks, Chirayu, and thanks very much to the FAAA for inviting me and for having me here this week. It's super exciting. I've never been to Ahmedabad. I've never been to India, so it's quite a experience for me. And thanks very much to Ismet and to Bimal for the initial invitation. So yeah, as Chirayu said, I'm an architect. I'm a curator. I'm originally from Melbourne, but I'm based in London at the moment. And I'm going to speak about an exhibition that we've put together at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London called All of This Belongs to You. It's sort of about architecture, but it's more about public space. It's more about the public sphere, and it's more about the roles that institution plays in shaping public sphere. So yeah, we've tried to use the museum, I guess, as a prototype for a public institution, and tried to test its limits, test what's possible in a museum, and what's possible to, is it possible to therefore change the way we relate to each other, the way that design shapes our everyday lives? These are the kinds of big questions that we're playing with at the museum. So, but first of all, I'm going to start with a short video. It's a 1979 BBC series called The Shock of the New. It's hosted by Robert Hughes, who is a late, great art critic, wrote for Time magazine for decades. And it's the final episode in his series where he takes stock of the new kinds of art that's emerging, so performance art, land art, institutional critique, and projects to where we might be headed and the role that the institution can play in that. So, Robert Hughes.
The museum has its own architecture, its own traditions, which don't fit here.
Clearly the museum can't handle all art. You can't fit a whole landscape with 400 tax-deductible spikes into it, and it's not a good place for small fleeting gestures because gestures don't sit well in a permanent collection. Nor is it a good place for getting shot at in, or half drowned in, or getting covered in goat guts, or experiencing any one of the other various things that body artists over the years have chosen to do to their bodies. Every institution has its limits, though it may try not to observe them. You have to think of museums as broadcasting on a given frequency, and not all the signals coming out of the culture can get on that one wavelength. This is not the museum's fault. A museum can no more contain all culture than a zoo can hold all nature.
And then he goes on this kind of dramatic compilation of where the museum's heading. It's commercializing, it's trying to entertain, it's trying to capture audiences in a different way, which he thinks is the wrong path. But really the bit that I'm excited about and that I'm really interested in is this phrase here, which I'll repeat. Every institution has its limits, although it may try not to observe them. You have to think of museums as broadcasting on a given frequency, and not all the signals on that not all the signals coming out of that culture can get on that one wavelength. So the exhibition that I'm going to focus on today is in many ways a response to this challenge that Hughes has laid down. We want to break the limits of the institution. We want to take a big stuffy old museum, a place that keeps all the most important frequencies, but let them out. Try and work out how can we connect with different kinds of publics, different kinds of people, and address the big urgent questions of public life. So in a nutshell, can the museum be a place of radical thought? This is the V&A. Who's been there? Have we got any hands in the room? Yeah, a handful of people, good. So yeah, on the surface, the V&A is not that place. It's not a place of radical thought. It's a kind of fortress of culture. It's a defended place that keeps all the nicest things that we've managed to produce over civilization. It carries with it 150 years of historical baggage and expectation from the public of what a museum like this should do. I should also say it's the largest museum of art and design in the world. There are 900 people working there. So even within the place, there are lots of different directions in which it might go. The idea of turning this thing around is itself a big project. Is there anything that a place like this can offer in terms of new ways of thinking or new ways of living today? There it is in the city. Our department, which was set up 2 years ago as the Department of Design, Architecture and Digital, is the first collecting department set up for 50 years. When we've been given a kind of mandate to rethink what collecting and what the museum could be like going forward into the future. So of course, one of the ways we approach that and one of the ways we research that and try to understand that is by looking first at its past. So this is a really great image. It's the pediment above the original main entrance, which is now forms a section of the courtyard of the V&A. And it kind of tells the history of this place. So what you're looking at here is, first of all, this black outline is the Crystal Palace designed by Joseph Paxton, 1851, so the world's first great exhibition. And in the center here, you see Queen Victoria. And she's got her arms out, receiving gifts from across the world. So you can see along the bottom, it says the first exhibition of the works of industry of all nations. And then it lists the countries which participated. And they're bringing the kind of best examples of design and production that they can do to England, to both, it had two outcomes. One was to inspire designers, to inspire producers, to inspire the people who are making this work to become better designers, and also to educate the public. So to create a public which had an appreciation for design and and were informed consumers, effectively, to create a market for good design. And it was, effectively, it was such a success. 1 year, it had millions of people through the doors that they decided to turn it into a kind of permanent idea. So the V&A was created as a sort of permanent great exhibition, if that makes sense. The founder was this man, Henry Cole, the first director and really the brains behind this idea of a big museum of art and design for the people, for the public. And I love this phrase, a powerful antidote to the gin palace. So you can, first of all, gin palaces must have been great. they were really distracting places. And yeah, his answer is, of course, let's provide something which is more educational but also entertaining. The way he did that were through a number of firsts for museums. So it's the first museum to have gas lighting, which meant it could be open in the evenings, and therefore the working people could attend. It also therefore had a cafe. So it's the first museum cafe. You could not only could you see the objects in the evening under the gas lights, but you could have a meal and continue your stroll around. And yeah, so it was also therefore the first museum to be open late into the evening. And I think that's a sort of deceptively radical idea, actually, that we might have museums that are open at night for people for working people who can't attend during the day. It's something which has been lost, perhaps. And it's kind of utopic. It's potentially patronising, but it has these great roots within the arts and crafts movement, within people like William Morris, John Ruskin, the Victorian social reformers who were trying to use big public institutions to improve the lives of the many, of all people, rather than just the elite, in which museums were really designed for before the V&A came along. And just to lighten things, this is a cartoon about William Morris and these conflicting ideas. So here he is with his revolutionary beard. Here comes Lord Worplesdon. Can you please try to keep your revolutionary views to yourself? Never. Ah, Morris, how's my wallpaper coming along? Very well, your lordship. Pompous capitalist leech. The beard yells at him. What? I said I'll have 20 rolls by Thursday. Good. Now I must get back to work on Lady Morven's fabric sample. Cowardly bourgeois lick spittle. So there's this great disjunction happening here between the anti-capitalist aims of people like William Morris and their production reality, which is, of course, as this comic says, working on fancy wallpaper for fancy private dining rooms. But still, anyway, this is also to say there is a radical past in this museum that we're trying to revive. We can point to something in the V&A's history which has this agenda to improve and to redefine what the public sphere is. And that's something which I think we all believe in as a team and are trying to revive through this show. So I'm going to first of all present a kind of pre-exhibition. This is a very small display which is semi-permanent, so it's 12 objects in 5 cases at the top of a stairwell in the museum, and it's a project called Rapid Response Collecting. So as the name suggests, it's simply about being extremely fast in collecting and bringing things into the museum. There was an unspoken rule that you would have to wait 50 years after something was made before you could acquire it. So therefore you can wait and make sure it's important enough, or that designer is somebody who's part of the canon now, and that it's established, and that this is really the greatest example of that particular bottle opener or chair or sideboard. But we're trying to turn that on its head and to say, no, if this museum is a place for debating questions of design and public life, then we need to keep up with public life. We need to keep up with the issues that are happening in the public sphere through the newspapers, on radio, through news channels. And we need to bring those objects in, the things which sit at the centre of many of these stories, and we need to bring them into the museum to create a space where we can debate them and debate the issues which they raise. So one of the questions we're throwing around at the moment is, how do you collect a Volkswagen defeat device? So this tiny bit of software inside a Volkswagen car, which has created this global crisis for the brand and for the environmental movement. How can we kind of extract that, separate that from this brand and put it on a plinth and come to understand what that is as a piece of design, as something which has been written and has huge consequences on the earth. I'm not sure we'll probably just park a Volkswagen out the front and then have a lecture, but either way, that's an example of a rapid response object that I think responds to a current issue in design today. So a couple of other examples first of all. Well, this is what it is. It's a very modest display, as you can see. Some of the other tactics we've used are magnetic labels. So we lined the cases in metal, and we get magnetic paper so we can print them out on the day that we get the object, and we don't have to go through design department, which can take 2 weeks, and they print out these little labels, and it goes to copy editing and all the rest. So we can kind of shortcut that whole process of the museum and just unlock the case and stick it up. And I'm going to first, present, I guess, what is our key object within this gallery.
Many thought this couldn't be done. A moment to celebrate for its maker. But could this plastic firearm have grave implications for gun control around the world? All of the major parts of this weapon have been created with this $8,000 3D printer. Computer designs are fed in, and the machine builds each component from layer upon layer of plastic. Untraceable and potentially undetectable, and now Cody Wilson plans to make his blueprints freely available online.
There's states all over the world outside the United States that believe, or that say, we're a gun control state, you can't own a firearm. That's not true anymore.
Aren't you worried about the kinds of people who'll be using this technology?
I recognize that the tool might be used, to harm other people. It's what it is, it's a gun. But again, I don't think that's a reason to not do it or a reason to not put it out there.
So that's Cody Wilson, who's a Texas-based law student and libertarian, as you can see. He firmly believes in the American right to bear arms, and he's created a product, a 3D printed file, a digital file which can be 3D printed to create a gun. The only thing you need to add to that is a real bullet and a nail, which forms the firing pin. Otherwise, you can email that gun to anywhere over the world and they can print it out locally. So we saw that as a kind of moment in time, as something which somehow like breaks the world. You know, it compresses and sort of highlights the extreme edge of what the networks that we've built lead to. This is a kind of extreme consequence of the internet. It's an extreme consequence of open networks and connectivity and digital world. So, but at the center of it, there's this physical artifact. So we thought that was, worth acquiring, worth debating, and worth hosting in the museum. So my colleague, a few weeks after that BBC slot aired, flew to Texas, met Cody in a diner, went to visit his studio, and bought for the museum all of his prototypes and all of his research. So this is a crate that arrived in the museum a few months later, and we now have it on display. So, not all of the examples that we're looking at are perhaps positive ones, or not all of them are ones which contribute to public life, but perhaps they force us to ask what this technology is leading to and where we stand on it. They perhaps force a consideration of our own ethics. It got a lot of press. This is the Independent. They didn't realize that they didn't think it was a threat. The Guardian did think it was a threat. The Telegraph thought it was the most important object of our time. And anyway, so again, the press is one way that we can host this debate, but we're ultimately hoping to, in a way, create a safe space in the museum where we can objectively debate what these objects mean. Another example is, again, a less sinister example, a carbon fiber lift cable. So this is just an example of a great new product. It's something which means lifts can go much taller, and in a way it's our way of collecting a skyscraper as an architecture collection. Another example, again, less of a positive one, is there's been a bit of a furore in London lately about anti-homeless spikes. So these are these little metal studs which building owners will stick up in doorways or windowsills or against warm windows, places where homeless might be inclined to sleep, as a way of moving them on or stopping them from doing that. Various activists have been known to come and pour concrete over these studs to sort of produce a new datum that submerges them under the concrete. There's been protests about them, and it's really become a kind of object of debate again in public. So we again acquired a series of these, and again we're the national collection of design, so we have 150 years of collecting, and we hope that will go on for another 150, 200 years. So somebody in 100 years who wants to understand what people were like, what we were like in 2015, might pull this out of a drawer and think that we were perhaps not very generous people, that the people of 2015 were treated those who are less fortunate a lot like pigeons, a lot like animals to be kept off their windowsills, and I think that's in a way a kind of obligation and part of the power of what a collection can do. Again, we're simply trying to connect the physical designed objects to civics and to ideology and to politics. So now too, all of this belongs to you. First of all, it's an exhibition. It closed about 2 months ago. It's co-curated by myself, Kieran Long and Karina Gardner. And it starts with this neon sign. 1 metre high letters, towering over the grand entrance, spelling out this phrase, all of this belongs to you. It's at once a statement about the whole museum. As a national collection, of course all of these things belong to the nation, they belong to you the visitor, to you the citizen. But we also hope that it's a provocation as well as being obvious to say, well, if all of this belongs to you, then what are you going to do about it? Are you going to look after it? Are you going to contribute, or are you going to make use of it, or are you just going to sort of leave it there? What are museums for? We hope that this sign actually says. And who is the you in this phrase anyway? What about those who don't normally attend museums? Does it belong to them? And how can we make it belong to them? The original proposal was for it to be on the street, to somehow, again, address this public space directly. But that image, a bit of Photoshop, 10-minute Photoshop on our part, is really what created the possibility to do this exhibition, which is quite a different kind of show in the museum. But unfortunately, we didn't get a planning permit to do it on the outside of the building. We got some resident objections who said that this statement cheapens the museum, and I thought that was just spectacular, because it's sort of like it felt like a sign of success that somehow, yes, we'd cheapened the building, yes, we'd eroded the elitism perhaps, or we'd eroded the fortress of the V&A, which excludes people who don't feel like it's for them, and that's a real problem we have in reaching out to different kinds of audiences. We live our museum is located in the most expensive suburb in the world, so terrace houses sell for tens of millions of pounds. Our neighbours, as you can imagine, are incredibly vocal, and they really oppose basically anything we try to do. So again, this wasn't a sign for them. In a way, that was another perhaps signal of our success. So what we did instead was put it on a T-shirt with a tag that said, "This did not get planning permission." Anyway, we had to move it inside, and I think that was actually in some ways better. It's very difficult to photograph, but it became not just a sign, not just a flat kind of sign, but a spatial object. Again, it highlighted this ambiguity. What is this in the phrase? Is it this arch? Is it this Jesus Christ? Is it this building? Is it this collection? Is it the people who work there? Or is it even you, the visitor, that somehow it's all of those things which add up to the institution, and all of it belongs to you. And as I said, it's intended as a gentle provocation. If all of it does belong to you, then what are you going to do with it? So we tested that phrase. We tested it through 4 main installations and a handful of accumulated events around it. We didn't have a gallery, we were distributed throughout the museum, so this is a map showing a sort of different things all over the place. Each of them were signed in this way. So I'm just going to talk through the four main components and then highlight some of the other things which are associated with the show. So first of all is a project by MUF. They're a London-based architecture practice run by Liza Fuel, and their project is called More Than One Fragile Thing at a Time. Our brief to them was simply this room. This is the Medieval and Renaissance Gallery. It's one of the kind of star spaces of the V&A. And in a way, it's designed as a prototypical public space. So it has, as you can see, it has these wells from medieval wells. It has a fountain. It even has a working fountain down here. These external architectural elements, balconies. It's day lit, and it has this screen facing onto the space. It's tiled, etc. I should also say the V&A is unticketed. This is really somewhere you can just walk straight in off the street and sit down in. So our brief to them was, okay, if this is a public space, how can we make it more of one? How can we take it all the way? What's missing here perhaps is discourse or dialogue or politics, the things that we expect and hope for from vibrant, successful public spaces. Their tactics worked on a number of different levels in terms of interventions. Some of them were very deceptively simple. So they simply introduced these squishy seats into the gallery. And that was just to say, look, this is a space that's continuous with the street. It's free, it's open, it's dry. You're not obliged to buy a coffee in order to stay there and sit all day. But there's only marble benches to sit on, so you couldn't physically sit there all day. What if we introduced a squishy sofa and you can come and, sleep if you want to, or you can draw a sketch, or you can just hang out here for the whole day and not get a sore bum. So it's a very simple gesture, which I think is deceptively powerful again. But really their main intervention was focused on this object here hanging on the wall. So this is a 15th century Madonna. It's the Madonna della Misericordia. It's Italian, it's from Venice, and it once hung on this wall. And you can see the scar where it once stood. And now we've pulled it out and put it onto our wall. So first of all, I think that's quite a powerful thing to highlight to some people, that all of these, it makes you in a way look twice at every single thing in the museum. So for every object there is somehow a gap left in Italy where it once stood. And what do we think about that? Liza proposed a process of what's described as reverse restitution. So if restitution means returning the sculptures back to the Parthenon, where they're from London, in order that site can be more complete. Their proposal was not to return that sculpture to this wall, but to bring this place and what it means to London. So to actually, in fact, bring its context across the sea to catch up with this object which has gone ahead. And the way they approached that was to first of all research this building and what that sculpture was originally for and what it's doing there. So it's a charity. It's a Christian charity, and as you can see in that object, this is in a way a diagram of charity. So the Madonna there standing is holding open her cloak and sheltering people underneath. So, it is a kind of pre-literate diagram of charity, of shelter. It says this is a place where you can come and be safe, that we'll help you. And their argument was that, well, that obligation to help doesn't end when we rip it off this building and take it to London. That somehow this object being in this room obliges us as a museum to offer charity. This is a symbol of charity, so shouldn't we continue that practice here in the museum. And again, so they asked, can this gallery be a charity? And what might that look like? They contacted a group called Women for Women Refugees. They, as the name suggests, campaign for refugee women who arrive in the UK. They provide legal advice, they provide housing support, they provide language lessons. And over a 6-month period during the course of the show, they hosted the language lessons of this refugee group inside the gallery, and they built these tables to accommodate that. They also, as you can see in the back here, brought in this quilt, which is a quilt made by the Refugee Women charity, and it's called their Solidarity Quilt, and each one of those squares represents a woman who is in detention. So she's waiting for her application for asylum to be processed, and they jail people who are waiting for that to be processed in the UK. So this group is advocating that they shouldn't be in jail, they should be in much more less offensive environments, and that quilt is representing all those women who were in jail, 300 of them, while their applications for asylum are processed. So again, we were able to, in a way, use the gallery and use the museum to give a platform to these people and to their voice, and to bring it again, to bring politics and debate into the museum. And we also had more joyous moments, like this group of Italian pensioners who simply came and had their singing group in this gallery as a kind of celebration of all the other Italian things in the room, and it was just nice. Sorry. Bob and Roberta Smith, who's an artist and activist, says that audiences should look like taxpayers, and I think that's a really big challenge to a place like us. It simply says, look around you. Do the people in this space look like the people in the street? And if not, then you're doing something wrong. And I think it's quite a powerful line, and it's something that we hope to live up to. He actually ran in the last general election. He didn't get anywhere, but it was very interesting. He ran on the platform of all schools should be art schools. He also advocates for a particular attitude to life which artists can bring, and creatives and architects and designers, which I think embodies a civic generosity. There's a certain care there which is taught to us through schools like CEPT and through general architectural training, and I think I certainly believe in that. I'll go a bit faster. How are we going for time? Yeah. So another project. This is by the Spanish-American artist Jorge OTERO-PAILOS. He's interested in architectural preservation and in time and in pollution, and how we can understand those kinds of material transformations over very long periods of time. Here he is looking at the base of Trajan's column, which is the largest object in the V&A. It's a one-to-one plaster copy of this column, which stands in Rome. It was created in the 1860s, and you can see the individual panels here being attached to this brick chimney. So there's hundreds of these panels, all spiraling down. And there it is in the gallery today. Jorge was interested in this strange juxtaposition of column and chimney and industrial revolution and pollution. So when this object was copied in the 1860s, it had stood in Rome for 1,500 years. And because the Industrial Revolution hadn't started by then, it was effectively intact. The air hadn't eroded it. So at the very moment that it was copied, it was also at its most pristine. And what's happened in the last 150 years is that those two objects have diverged. Our copy remains pristine because it's indoors, and the copy in Rome has been severely eroded to the point where the conservators from Rome come to the V&A to inspect our copy in order to undertake their work there. So what happened here? What happened was chimneys, actually. Exactly the same as this chimney which R1 is attached to. The British and the rest of Europe started polluting the atmosphere, and that's eroded R. Created pollutants which attach to stone and then erodes it. So Jorge wanted to somehow bring these two objects back together again, to reunite the column and the chimney, and to see if we could use this new object as a way to understand these different histories and question ideas like authenticity and originality. You know, what happens if the copy is more high resolution than the original? Which is the actual original? Which is more useful for study? So he painted the inside of the brick chimney, the inside of this column, with latex. That's what you're looking at here. It's conservation latex. It's used for cleaning buildings. You paint it onto a wall, you peel it off, and it lifts off all the dirt and dust and cleans your wall. They also use it in sculpture. Pulled it out through the door, turned it inside out, laid it out on the floor, and then hung it up from the ceiling as a third ghost column. So what you're looking at here is a latex copy of the inside of this column hanging from the roof. And you can see the brick pattern, which is the chimney inside this. Does that make sense to everybody? It's hard to know if it communicates this project, because it's quite complex. But anyway, we also thought it was just simply a beautiful thing to put into our cast courts, our room of copies, and to think about long periods of time, and also to in a way reveal the process of conservation. So we talk about artworks that work. It's no longer enough just to make an artwork that we stand back and look at and admire, but can we make things which actually contribute, that produce, that participate in the functions of the museum, or create new ways of thinking. Unfortunately, I'm going to skip over this one because it really is very complex. NATALIE JEREMIJENKO is an Australian artist, and here she is in a bee suit working on her project, The Republic of Air. She was interested in the museum as part of a wider ecology, and in this particular instance we have bee keeping and honey production on top of the museum because the bees are at risk. She created this diagram, which is what's called a phenological clock. It's a 12-month clock showing different species and when they're active within the course of the year. So again, it tries to say you're part of this ecosystem. And one of the things which the guides were doing is to ask a child when they came into the museum, when's your birthday? And they would say, well, it's April the 2nd. And then they would run up and say, okay, this particular red butterfly is just emerging from its cocoon on your birthday. And I think that creates a really direct relationship between your cycle of time and the cycle of nature. And she's trying to highlight that and I guess reconnect us back to the world. Again, something which museums are famously good at rejecting. You know, climate control, no pests, no moths, nothing to eat anything. There is no nature inside a museum. So she was trying to, in a way, bring that back. One of the other projects she did was a performance called Moth Cinema, where she plants various plants which will attract moths and host moths and grow them there. Here she is with a big moth. And then she had this great bizarre suggestion to let's talk to Julian Assange about moths. If you don't know who Julian Assange is, he's the founder of WikiLeaks. He's currently in self-imposed exile within the Ecuadorian embassy in London, which is 5 minutes walk around the corner from the V&A. He's been there for 3 years. He hasn't been able to leave. And NATALIE somehow saw this connection, and I think it is an interesting and powerful one, between bottom-up strategies like building moth gardens, which can transform cities and create new habitats, and the work that WikiLeaks do, which is to somehow take the raw materials of communications, of diplomacy, set it free in order to make a new world. So they're both, in a way, bottom-up strategies. It's a bit of a tenuous link, I'll acknowledge that, but either way, she said, I want to interview Julian Assange, and as a curator, your obligation somehow is to try and make that happen, so we did. And we should get a bit of audio. Maybe. Oh dear, oh well. It might not work because we've done it doesn't matter, I'll jump over it. Anyway, so we did an interview with Julian Assange standing here in the garden of the V&A. Bizarrely, 3 Australians talking about leaking data and networks, holding a panda, and I'll come to the panda. But one of the things which he said, which I think is very important, is that a lot of serious political activists are migrating from calling themselves journalists or documentary makers to calling themselves artists, simply because of the encroaching constraints. So that's he's talking about, people like, somehow art is seen as more constructive inherently. And it's also protected by freedom of expression in a way that journalism is not. It's becoming a last refuge of these incredibly critical activists, and I think he's put his finger on something interesting and important there. And that's what comes to the panda. So the panda was actually a gift to Assange from the artist Ai Weiwei, the filmmaker Laura Poitras, who made Citizen4, which is the film about Edward Snowden, and Jacob Appelbaum, who is an independent activist and hacker. They made these pandas and then stuffed them with the shredded files of the Snowden leaks, including a USB with all of those leaks on the panda, on the USB disk. So. And then they sent it to Assange as a kind of present from one artist activist to another, sympathetic ear. And then Assange lent it to us, so we have it now in the museum.
Well, I haven't actually seen
Oh, here we go.
it for years. I had this very interesting experience the other day where there was a slug in my salad, and I thought, my God, what an amazing, beautiful thing, an animal that I haven't seen in a very long time. So, yeah, it can be a bit difficult being in such a situation, but it also gives you a different perspective.
So that was a short clip. Sorry, I didn't have the longer version. It didn't quite work. But that was Assange talking about finding a slug in his salad, and that connection back to the world of nature. Moving on, there was a small display which we put together called Ways to be Public. It was more about focusing on architecture and urbanism and the way that architects have tried to redefine public space and what different tactics they're using to define public space in the age of networks. So when we're no longer necessarily connected to our local community by virtue of space, when we can get in a car and drive somewhere else, when we can call somebody on the other side of the world, when we can immerse ourselves in our own social network online, what relevance is place, and how can we kind of reaffirm its power within the city? One of the key objects in this, projects in this exhibition is the Sabarmati riverfront, and you can see on the end wall here one of the renderings produced for that project, which formed a kind of road runner wall extension of the gallery. That hasn't quite come out. We're interested in it as a kind of massive scale infrastructure project. How can a city completely reorient itself toward a river again and create a new space for public and for people to come together, and how does that manifest itself? So look, I'm not going to talk much about it tonight because that's part of the reason also why I'm here, is to come and visit this place, which I have not yet, and to understand how it works and how it relates to the city, and to speak to different people and get a broader sense of its impact as a public space. So that's the image again that we had on the end wall. And what we really liked, and of course it's unfortunate the levels of inequality, but this person and this person are not people that you would see on a real estate board in London, which are always completely whitewashed. You know, they're always aspirational statements about the kinds of people that this is for. And somehow this felt more inclusive. It was at least an intention, a bold statement to say that this is a space for everyone and we're not going to kick out people who aren't dressed like us. We're also interested in the way that project seems to be becoming a model or a prototype for Modi's campaign to modernize cities, and how he's then using that as on the international stage. So here he is, as you all know, hosting Premier Xi Jinping of China. And because we're the V&A and because we have all the amazing old things, we're able to put that project opposite this document, which is from 1864, and it's the original construction drawings of Bazalgette's Thames embankment. So the very first waterfront, riverfront redevelopment from 150 years ago. The first underground tube line before electric trains, so steam trains going through underground tunnels. It was quite a crazy idea at the time. And then major sewer, and just this very strong wall front to the river, removing all the old docks and piers and bays of the Thames. So again, for me, this is a proto-modernist section. It's a sort of powerful statement for what a city can be, and shows incredible vision and imagination. And I think that bold step made 150 years has led to what London is today. So again, when I'm visiting the river this week, I'll be thinking about what it does on the daily cycle, but also how might it transform and reorient a city over 150 years in a way that this project has done for London. I'm concerned about time. I'll try and go for another 5 minutes. I might jump over. Well, no, let's do this bit because this is proper architecture. I haven't given you much of that yet. I'm going to talk about two drawings, one by Mies van der Rohe and one by David Chipperfield. They're both drawings for national museums. They're both drawings for national museums in Germany, both of them in Berlin. One of them from 1964 and one of them from the 1990s. This drawing, which is in our collection, is of Mies van der Rohe's Neue National Gallery, which is this project. It's 1964. Germany, and Berlin in particular, is divided. The Berlin Wall is standing. The memory of 2 world wars is vivid for many or all of its residents. How do you design a national museum at that point? How do you say this is a nation which is divided, a nation which is recovering from the 20th century, from 2 world wars? I think Mies's response, although we haven't found the smoking gun quote, is to defer that question, is to say, we can't define a national museum at this point. All we can do is create a container for a future public to say, and I think that's what he's done here. So for those of you who know the building, it's a gallery, and it's a glass pavilion on a plinth. The galleries are underground, and the glass pavilion sits above. So that's what you're looking at here. Mies determined that this layer should not be, this entry level should not be a space for exhibiting. It should just be a place for the public. So I think what he's doing there is defining the nation, defining this national institution through the people who come to it and through their exposure to each other. So it's in a way a kind of vacant space to collect people, to collect public, and that's how it defines itself. This is a more recent drawing. It's by David Chipperfield. Again, as I said, it's also in Berlin. It's for the Neues Museum. And the Neues Museum was first built in the 1850s. It was the National Museum of Fine Art and Antiquities. It was destroyed or largely damaged in the First World War, and then further damaged in the Second World War, and then it was left vacant for almost 50 years. In the 1990, when the wall came down, a competition was arranged to restore and reinvent that institution and return it as the National Museum of Germany. David Chipperfield won the project, and this is one of the working drawings that was produced by the office throughout that project. This is a detail. So his response was to look at the individual cracks, was to survey this building, this damaged building, obsessively, looking at every single inch of every single wall, and then make a decision on how to treat it. You know, when has this damage occurred? Is it significant? Is it part of a battle? Is it a bullet hole, or is it just water damage? Where is the significance in the history of this building, and how can we respond to it? So the finished building is the accumulation of tens of thousands of individual decisions. There's no big sweeping gesture that says we're going to build a new wing or we're going to treat it all the same. No. They look very carefully at this fabric and say, this is worth protecting, this we can replace, this is something which needs reinforcement, or this is something which we can paint over, or this is something that requires complete restoration as original. And what you end up with is this incredible patchwork of materials which captures that history. And in a way, I think what it does is it also defines a nation, it also defines Germany, but it speaks much more about the attitude of Germany in reunification. So it says, no, we need to confront our history, we need to confront the actual scars of history, and we need to build the museum out of those actual scars. We can't paint over them, we can't replaster them, we can't ignore them. We need to directly confront the 20th century and what we've done and build a new society out of that. And I think that's what this project does, and I think this drawing, as a record of those decisions, is the site, is the actual moment where that building is conceived. So it's something that we're super excited to have acquired, and I guess that's where this logic extends itself into more conventional architecture and more conventional architects. So I might just skip over a few things. And then, well, I will mention this because, are you sure? What, if I go for another 10 minutes, will anybody leave? Okay, I'm not that far from the end. Thank you, sir. Right, so we had ways to be public, and the flip side is ways to be secret, another display which is looking at security and surveillance. This is a damaged computer. It was one which belonged to the Guardian newspaper, which they uploaded the files which Snowden leaked onto this computer in order to read them and to review them and to create their stories from. Over the course of releasing those stories, the British government became increasingly fed up with the Guardian. It came to a head where they sent agents over to the newspaper and demanded that they give them the computer. They refused, they didn't want to hand over that data. So then the government said that they needed to destroy the computer. They then, under supervision, conducted a kind of forensic destruction of this computer. So the motherboard is scraped clean with an angle grinder. Hard drives are drilled through multiple times. As you can see, even the trackpad is cracked, and as a result of this destruction, forensic computer scientists have realized that the trackpad contains a very tiny amount of memory, enough to perhaps put a tiny bit of software on there which could secretly trigger the microphone and turn your computer into a recording device. And so they've destroyed this computer and other hard drives which they had with it. And then yeah, and that was that. They turned that into the story then, that the British government had, ordered the destruction of a journalist's property. Alan Rusbridger, who opened our exhibition, who's the chief editor of the Guardian. It should also be said that they had a copy of the data in the US, in their US offices. So destroying this computer was a kind of hollow gesture. It was saying, it was more a statement of the state flexing their muscle to intimidate the newspaper rather than to technically stop them from having access to the data, because they had the data anyway. But what in the opening of our show, Alan Rusbridger said, "I think this is a message of hope, that this being the computers, the smash computers, it allows a continuation of what was necessary, what was a necessary debate, a debate that had to be had, because this is our data, the data belongs to us." So by putting them on display, by putting them in the museum, we hope to be able to, focus on this question of. Of course, the Snowden leaks revealed that your email provider, your Gmail, are sending everything that you do to the National Security Agency, the NSA in the USA, who have a file on all of us, and they know exactly what we're doing all the time, because these technology companies are in complete complicit cooperation with the FBI and the NSA. So that's what he revealed. But that data doesn't belong to them, it belongs to us. And I think that's what these computers stand for. It stands for the sort of extreme edge of government overreach and of technical overreach, and the need to claw back some of this civic information. Much more simply, I'll rush through the rest here. We put a Fairphone, that's a mobile phone that's made out of conflict-free minerals, into the silver gallery case. So again, we did some kind of acupunctural comparisons around the museum to try and create new understandings. We acquired a security bollard, which is a 10,000-pound object that will stop a truck driving 40 kilometers an hour, sort of anti-terrorism device. The sort of thing which is completely invisible walking down the street. You see hundreds of them on every day in London. And simply by putting it here, we can say, wow, that's a really strange thing that's just popped up in the last 10 years everywhere. Again, anti-homeless spikes. We had a small display in one of the niches within the main entry. Really this kind of spot where you might go and look for a spot to sit down. So it was ambiguous whether they were intentional or we were actually using them. And that made the cover of the New York Times art section, which we're quite proud of. I will skip that. It requires too much. And finally, we also had some alumni of your own, Superflux, Anab Jain and John Arden, who, Anab is from here. She now runs a studio in London, and they produced this project called Drone Avery, which is a series of speculative drones. One of them is a press drone that looks for activity on Twitter and flies to that location and broadcasts it. One of them is a road traffic drone that just hovers above an intersection, directing cars, etc. So we also had some Indian design in the show. Okay. So we've had Assange's caterpillars, Snowden's laptop, Rusbridger's call to arms, Ai Weiwei's Teddy. It should now be clear that as architecture and design curators, we're not really interested in Frank Gehry or Mark Newson. We're interested in the things that shape the way we live together. And today we think those things are data, technologies, leaks, our collective relationship to climate, globalization, and civic generosity. Design is not separate. It's not about lifestyle. It's not about the way things look. It's not about who designed it. Designs embody ideas about the way we live together. These ideas are contested and require public forums for the implications of these ideas to be debated. That's the obligation of all public institutions today, and the obligation of the Design Museum is to have this conversation via objects. Who cares? What's at stake? This is, again, about how we live together. These objects stand at the intersection of our private and public lives. All objects embody ethics. Just as an archaeologist will come to understand a culture through the artifacts they dig up, we think it's possible to look at the things we create today and consume today to understand the kind of world that we're building for the future. So issues like the rise of the right, our attitude to migrants and refugees, the spread of democracy, marriage equality, other civic rights struggles, the support of public institutions such as healthcare or schooling, all of this is about the design of our public lives, and all of this has objects at its centre. Finally, if we return to Robert Hughes, this video that I showed at the very beginning, and his challenge, every institution has its limits. Well, if that's true, then we want to find them and we want to break them down, because we don't want to be limited by the particular frequency that the V&A purports to operate on. These places are ours. It's up to us what we want to make with them, and it's up to us what we want to do with them, to repurpose them, reinvent them, and to turn them inside out. Just quickly, there's two threads going forward in terms of the extension of this work. One is we're building a new museum in East London, and we're hoping to put some of this thinking, some of these ideas at the centre of it. This is a very early rendering. It's going to be designed by Irish architects O'Donnell and Toomey. And secondly, I'm working now on a new exhibition, which is partly why I'm here, visiting local designers, etc., called Future Design. So perhaps the question this asks is, how can you go faster than rapid response? How can we collect or understand the future through design, not just the present? And then, therefore, can we have an influence on where culture goes? Can we shape that future? Can we steer it? Can we use objects to force these questions? It really does all belong to you. Thank you. We're going to do questions. And I realise if people want to leave, because we've gone a bit over, then I won't be offended, but we'll do 10 or 15 minutes of questions.
Few questions, yeah? Well, maybe I'll start with a question. I had thought something while you were speaking, and the question I had is about if you can share your thoughts on what's the role of a curator in today's time. I mean, you spoke about how somebody in the future will look at this time and look at the things that you've collected in this collection and maybe get a sense of what the time today was about. But is there a role for the public at large which this belongs to? And so how do you engage with people in the process of curating or even operating a museum like this, which is a public?
Yeah. It's a really good question. I mean, on the one hand, I think that the first question is, what's the role of a curator? And I think you need to be a very perceptive, sensitive person who understands the zeitgeist and tries to reveal those. I mean, we talk about very weak signals, so it might not be the dominant narrative, but it might be the things which are happening at the fringes, which are perhaps more exciting or more relevant to young designers today. And that requires, constantly breaking down your established boundaries of what is considered design. You need to continually reevaluate and re-question what that is. But then the second half, the role of the public, I mean, we have produced some sort of feedback input methods. So for rapid response, we have a website where people can suggest objects of their own, and we have acquired a handful of the public suggestions. But you're right, it's probably something we need to do more if we are. I mean, we host events, we try to host debates, we try to create scenarios where we can gather and collect intelligence, but we can always do more.
Okay, so thank you very much for inspiring us, and thank you so much for going on and on. We're greedy. So clearly the V&A represents what you were talking of, a present narrative, but historically it has millions of objects in it that were seen to be treasures or special in their own way, as a reflection of process, materials, aspects of culture that are still of immense value. And just beside us here, we have the LD Institute of Indology. It's a museum that has treasures of all aspects of Indian sculptural and painted tradition that hopefully you might see in a wonderful building. So in the context of your current narrative, you identified clearly a new role for the museum to play, but there's also this tremendous storehouse of richness and treasure that also has a role to play in terms of reconnecting with people, being re-energized. And so there was one point when you showed us objects placed in the galleries, so the mobile phone, the bottle and so on. So the proximity of new and old, such that, but have you thoughts on all of that and more that's there to be re-energized?
Yeah, no, again, really great question. I mean, I think probably the best example perhaps of what you're talking about is the Muff reframing of this Madonna sculpture. And I think that really opened our eyes to the potential for telling contemporary narratives through historic objects. I mean, or I guess more specifically, to take objects which have been understood in art historical terms and reframe them in social terms. I think that's the big power of that project, is to say, yes, the current label reads, this was sculpted by this person, they were trained by this person, they were part of this movement, this style, and it occurred in this city, in this part of Italy. It doesn't tell you anything about the charity or anything about the social role of that object. And I think it would be an amazing project to kind of rewrite labels. As you say, the two simplest tools that the curator has are putting things next to each other, and that can be incredibly powerful, as you can see with a bollard in a steel metalwork gallery to reevaluate things, or a phone in a silver gallery, and also interpreting things for the public, and that's a continual process. There's no fixed interpretation for any of these objects. They're brought in with particular ideas and intentions at that moment, but we continually need to question those and reevaluate those and represent those depending on the current condition. So I think the idea that there are such things as permanent galleries is wrong. We need to continually revisit them, refresh them, and ask different, harder questions of them. And I think I've shown one example, but it would be a fantastic project to do a kind of contemporary show using only historical objects that we can reanimate through understandings like that. Thanks for the great question.
One.
Hi. So we basically are living in a world that's really closely connected, and the nightly news is fairly the same. I mean, everyone sees a lot of the same things around the world. But so the things that you're doing with these rapid collections is to find things that are of interest to people in, say, in London, or to an extent Europe. But if you look at the context and the fact that you're here, and the V&A also has a history of being, thing about Queen Victoria receiving things from around the world. So is there an effort to try and contextualize things? Because a lot of these things would mean nothing to somebody on the streets of Ahmedabad. Right. So is there an effort to try and contextualize what is meaningful to people over here, so that somebody visiting the museum in London can get a perspective of what other people might think is of value or of interest?
Yeah, it's another great question. It's there are some examples of well, first of all, the museum tries to be global and it tries to be comprehensive, but it's an impossible task, of course. So we have a fantastic South Asian and Indian collection. We have exhibition that opened last week called The Fabric of India, and we have some of the most incredible examples of Indian textiles from going back 800 years in our collection. And it was a quote that I read recently in the newspaper from a Turkish designer who said that she'd never been interested in her own Turkish history, in her own Ottoman architecture or that kind of Islamic design, until she saw it in the Islamic galleries at the V&A, and then realized how its significance and its importance, and was able to take that back to her work as a contemporary designer in Turkey. One of the other civic objects, or these, the mobile phone in the case, or these switching games that we played with existing galleries, was a school uniform from a high school in Shenzhen. And it's the same, all high schools have the same school uniform, so it's a very well recognized everyday object from Shenzhen in China. And in a way, what this uniform has done is, in a city which changes so rapidly, it's created a kind of collective amongst all school children who can identify each other in this, and they form some sort of a civic unit. We switched out one of the very significant historic Chinese outfits in the China Gallery and put this white contemporary Chinese tracksuit in its place, which on the one hand seems like in terms of questions of taste and aesthetics, it seems completely ridiculous, but it became a real sensation. Chinese students in London would come and visit this and have their photos taken in front of it. It went viral on WeChat, which is the Chinese version of Twitter, Weibo rather. And it even made it onto the CCTV, so the Chinese national news did a story about how we'd put this tracksuit in our gallery. And we couldn't understand it, but apparently they were basically saying, they're crazy. They don't understand that this is not an object of value, that this is just a normal crappy tracksuit. So there is a kind of power of the museum which I think we're aware of, and we try to play with through transposing objects that are everyday. And simply by putting them in a case, you can create something new, you can create attention on that thing, or you can use it as a way to tell a story. So, yeah, we don't have anything here. Perhaps I'll discover something this week. I hope to. It will be fantastic. Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay. Maybe last question.
Yeah.
Hi, I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I was reading that statement from the editor-in-chief of Guardian, and which said something about the debates that ought to be had, that the debate that had to be had.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about all the debates about this city and things that go on here that have to be had. And I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how do you decide on what kind of things should be brought forward first, or what should we do now? Or there's so many things that could be talked about that could be sort of the subtle things that could be brought out.
Yeah. No, again, it's a really good question, and I mean, I'm not sure if you're asking about the particular issues in this city, but
yeah, not about the city. But
I mean, in a way, that laptop what objects can do is they can provide a kind of node, a center of gravity for a debate to occur around. The objects are somehow more, objective, to use a phrase that's contained within it, in that people can use them for different reasons, or it can become a kind of shared territory. It's not like an opinion piece in a particular newspaper, which is so attached to its, argumentation. An object can perhaps provide a common ground, and I think I'm not sure the laptop did that actually. I think it became a kind of, example of the overreach of the state, but it couldn't have been used as an example of, protecting our, the usefulness of keeping data, or the opposite view, which is to stop terrorists effectively. We need all this data. We need to keep building the haystack in order to catch terrorists. And I'm not sure that computer stands for that argument. So the challenge for us, and we're limited to using objects because we're a design museum, is to find those things which can sit at the intersection within a debate that can be therefore used as a space to connect to ideologies or ideas which can't come together. And I think for this, yeah, you need to ask and find out what are those things in this city, where are the spaces, and they might be institutions, they might be pieces of design, they might be pieces of parts of the city which can be used as a platform to bring dissenting voices, warring voices together in order to somehow, yeah, open up the discussion in a safe way that's not antagonistic. I think that's yeah, we hope to do more of that again. Yeah.
Thank you. May I request Ujjwal to give the vote of thanks?
Thanks, Dr. Hyde. Thanks for sharing your experience of curating this exhibition and sharing the insights gained from the exhibits that you have selected that probably explored the interrelationships of design, civics, ideology, philosophy, or for that matter, secret and private lives. Thank you, CEPT, students and alumni, for making this event happen. And thank you, Symphony Limited, Private Limited, for their continuous support. May I request Vidhish to come and give a token of appreciation to Rory Hyde, please? Thanks. Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for coming now. And we hopefully see you next time in the next FFA lecture. Thanks.